Welcome to our second video in our budgeting workshop, Starting an Emergency Fund. Now, if you didn't see the first video in this series, I'd encourage you to start there and go through these videos sequentially. But if you want to start off on this step, it's a good step, it's a practical step. We're talking about emergencies. Now, I've been told that there are two things that none of us can avoid: death and taxes. And I'd add to that emergencies. From my experience, and pretty much from the experience of everyone else, emergencies are going to be part of the reality in life. And so how do you handle emergencies? How do you prepare for financial emergencies? Well, that's what we want to talk about as we think about starting an emergency fund. Well, here's the first thing you need to know. Emergencies will happen. You might try and live your life with your head in the sand thinking that emergencies aren't going to happen, but here's something I learned once I got to adulthood. Once I got to adulthood, I learned that every year something like the car is going to break down, or maybe the next year the oven is just going to stop working the day before Thanksgiving. Or once I had kids, I realized that my kids from time to time are going to break their arm and I'm going to have to take them to the hospital and get stuck with a deductible. So what I'm trying to tell you is emergencies happen to us. They just do. You might have some magic time for a couple of years when you don't get any emergencies, and you should thank God for those moments. But for most of your life, emergencies are going to happen, and so we need to know how to plan for emergencies. Plan for them. They're going to happen. This is good biblical wisdom. Proverbs 21:20. In the house of the wise are stores of choice food and oil, but a foolish man devours all he has. This verse is saying that wise people don't squander everything they have. They set some aside. And one of the best reasons to set money aside is for an emergency. And it's really good to do this early on in your money makeover time, to start building in money for emergencies. And that brings us to our next point. Start building your fund today. It's important that you start building up your emergency fund right away, right? Because emergencies are going to happen. They're just going to happen. And so right away, as soon as you start saving money, as soon as you start budgeting, put money in there for emergencies. Sometimes the hardest thing is to get to that first $1,000 of emergency savings, but you'll feel so much better once you do. But we don't want to stop there at like $1,000. Here's a good plan to have. A good plan to have is to have 6 months worth of savings in the bank. Now, some of you are like, whoa, 6 months? I have like 4 days worth of savings in the bank. But here's what I want to encourage you to do. I want you to think of this one step at a time. So let's say that you make $60,000 a year. And I know some of you are like, whoa, I'd love to make $60,000 a year. But let's just say for illustrations that you make that much a year. So that means we're going to set aside 1 month's worth of salary. That's what we're going to try and build up to. That's your goal, 1 month's worth of salary, $5,000, right? And you're going to save, and you're going to build up to that number, and you're going to not go to Starbucks. You're going to avoid things so that you can build up to that $5,000. Then the next step is to build up for 2 months worth of savings, $10,000. Right now, I just want you to imagine how it would feel to have $10,000 of emergency savings stored away. That'd feel pretty good, right? Well, you're going to do that. Again, you're going to sacrifice. You're going to put off things. You're not going to buy that new car that you wanted because you're going to build your emergency fund. And then eventually, you're going to get up to 6 months of savings, $30,000. And once you have $30,000 stashed away, you're really ready for emergencies, whether if it's a bit like the transmission goes out in your car or you find yourself without a job. And it's really important that you start funding that emergency fund today. And here's something else to think about. Reserve the fund for real emergencies. Now, here's what happens. Once people have like $1,000 in the bank, or $5,000 or $10,000 or even $30,000 in the bank, you're like, this is great. Now we can go on that vacation to Europe. Or now we have that money for that down payment on that vacation home. Or now we can, indulge ourselves in some way. But remember, this money is not your fun money. This money is not even for long-term purchases that you've been wanting to make. This money is for emergencies. So reserve this money for real emergencies. Like we've said, job loss, car breaks down, a medical emergency. Medical emergencies contribute so much to bankruptcy in our country. And so save this for real emergencies. And then when those real emergencies happen, you'll be able to thank God and say, God, thank you so much for providing for me for all those years, helping me build up an emergency fund so I can use it for such a time as this. And then if you have to start depleting your emergency funds, start building them back up. I know this is hard. I know this sounds even a little crazy to some of you, but you can do it. And there is so much peace of mind, I can tell you from personal experience, that comes with having an emergency fund.